But first today, alongside 700 other people committed to arresting the decline of Western civilisation, and in particular, democracies like ours in Australia, I spent the day at the first ARC conference in Sydney. Now, as you heard last night from one of the founders, John Anderson, ARC, or the Alliance of Responsible Citizens, is a new movement from the centre-right of politics and policy and thought to start the pushback against defeatism, against wokery and, let's be honest, the growth of socialism in our once proud West. Its objective is to inspire ordinary citizens, businesses and think tanks and more to tackle the left's march through our institutions. ARC held its first conference last November in London, and today it was Australia's turn. Now, I hope you're able to tune in to a little bit of it here on Sky News and that you're inspired by the amazing array of speakers. As I promised last night, after they got off the stage, I managed to pull a couple of them aside to follow up on some of the thought-provoking conversations they kicked off. One of the speakers who really challenged everyone in the room was clinical social worker, psychoanalyst Erica Commissar, who took the audience through the demonstrable links between institutional childcare and the mental health explosion we're seeing amongst our young people. Now, when she spoke, you could have heard a pin drop.
There's very clear evidence that or institutional care under the age of 3 leads to increased aggression, behavioral problems, and attentional issues when children get to the school age. And so, no, there's a great deal of evidence that breaking the bond between a mother and a child, or what we say the primary attachment figure and the child, at such an early age does incredible damage. So what we do know is that 85% of the right brain, or the social emotional brain, which is responsible for things like emotional regulation and the ability to cope with stress in the future, it's developed by the age of 3. So when we separate mothers and babies prematurely, we are inevitably causing a lot of these mental health issues that we see today.
So we're seeing that growth in mental health issues because of institutional care, but we're also seeing this extraordinary growth in the push to send particularly young infants into care and push mums back into the workforce. Yep. The correlation's there, so why aren't we learning from our mistakes?
Well, there's a denial of biological, evolutionary things that have allowed us to survive as a species for millennium. And so, in the last 75 years, we're trying to change, again, biological things that have helped us for centuries to raise healthy children. I think that the feminist movement, again, did a great deal of good for women. I am a benefactor of that, as are you. But it went too far in saying that the only meaningful work is work outside the home, and it started to devalue and deprioritize mothering in a way where it, as you say, it made women feel as if they should feel ashamed for staying home, that it wasn't meaningful work if it wasn't paid work.
I thought one of the most sobering points you made was not everyone has the same financial choices, and childcare often and work, balancing all of that comes down to choices, but you say everyone still has choices.
Yeah, we
Not
do.
the same, but they have choices.
Exactly. The choices for a woman who works, maybe instead of using, listen, institutional care is always going to be a choice, because governments are always, we're not trying to take it away from women who want it as a choice. We're trying to make the choice available to families to raise their own children, knowing it's far better for the children and for the families to do so.
And one of those is we're about to hit a federal election here in Australia. One of those you made very clear in the room is we should prioritise this issue as something we look at when we assess our political choices at the ballot box.
Absolutely. I think that you, by making sure that you support a government that does not support institutional care, you are actually taking a step in the right direction.
I'll have more to say on childcare policies as we head into the election. I think it should be fairer, and I think the money should go to parents, not childcare centres. But let's stay with ARC. Historian and author Sunil Ferguson, well, he spoke today about the enormous risk that, if left unchecked, big tech presents to the fundamental values we have in the West, like freedom of speech and democracy. And he also said this isn't just a problem for those we elect to address. We've all got to get more engaged, he says, in the West.
The public sphere itself has been radically transformed in the last 20 years. We've moved from a world in which newspapers and television networks dominated the media to a world in which 30% of young Americans get their news from TikTok, a Chinese-owned app. A handful of network platforms dominate the information space, and they have tremendous power and almost no responsibility. But an even bigger problem is that, and partly for this reason, the platforms have accrued to themselves tremendous power to censor or just to gently suppress information that they don't like. And that lack of accountability gives them tremendous political power, not only in the United States, but all around the world, with the exception of China, where they're excluded.
So give us some hope, because part of the story of ARC, first in London, now in Australia, is to enable citizens to be empowered and to have a story of hope. We talk about leaders needing to lead, good leaders leading, but you also say we're all responsible now for the job ahead, aren't we? What do you want ordinary Australians to do?
Well, part of the problem with the internet age is that we think clicking the like button is activity. It's not. We have to be far more engaged as citizens in everything from school governance through local government all the way up to national politics. And I think it's been true of our generation that we have been relatively passive, if not downright apathetic. Activism, engagement, does not consist of going online and doom scrolling your way through X or whatever your favorite social media platform is. A like is not engagement. So it's not just leadership that we need in the West, it's what I'll call followership, and that means the readiness to, give up an evening to go to that parent-teachers meeting, get involved with the school board. All over the English-speaking world, there are opportunities for citizens to be more active than they are.
So you're saying we've got to push back?
Yeah. Well, in my own life, there are moments when, human resources will send out an email which strikes me as wildly woke, and I just kind of, delete or ignore, but I should do more than that. I should say, why is this being sent around? Why are you recommending this action, which is at odds with my fundamental principles? I think we all need to be a little bit more engaged in resisting the woke mind virus. It spreads partly because our apathy leaves us defenseless against the contagion.
Tony Abbott often used to say, the silent majority won't stay the majority if it stays silent. And this is, an extension of that. You want us to be active citizens.
I think active citizenship is central to democracy. The West was not just based on representative government and the rule of law. Civil society, the engagement at the local level was as important as those things. And I think we've somewhat tended to forget that because it's so hard to find time. It doesn't pay. Why are you going to that meeting? Why not stay home and watch television? And the response to that is, if I don't go to the meeting, if everybody doesn't go to the meeting, then the far left, the radical so-called activists will get the upper hand. One reason that the left has been so effective over the last 20 years is that they do show up at those committee meetings. And that organisation is what people on the other side have chronically lacked. ARC is about making up that deficiency and reviving the idea of active citizenship.
And we're starting to see that pushback, aren't we? Acknowledgements to country, welcomes to country. 5 years ago, people would not have spoken out against them, and now they are. Post the Voice, they are. Now, a little later in that day, I had the pleasure of interviewing on the stage Tony Shepherd, the former president of the Business Council of Australia, who's had an impressive private sector career in infrastructure, but he was also the bloke appointed in 2013 by the incoming Abbott government to deliver its first audit, or the first audit actually, of Commonwealth spending in almost 20 years. Now, it was a wide-ranging discussion. Ultimately, we focused on the question of whether governments and a public that's become increasingly reliant on taxpayer spending could ever be convinced to wind back big government. to do things for ourselves more responsibly, more sustainably. Shepard's assessment was sobering.
What's happened, the spend-a-thon we had with COVID has got the people, state governments and federal government, used to handing out money and taking money. So we've created a sort of a population now which expects this to continue, despite the fact that COVID's over. We've bred a population in recent time which has got used to being looked after and finding money coming from the government, whether it be state or federal. So I think we've got a real challenge.
There are also those two wonderful regulars here on Credlin at ARC today, John Anderson, of course, Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price. They opened the day, they opened indeed their panel appearance with a wonderful video. Here's a little bit of it for you to enjoy.
I think it's fair to say, Jacinta, that you and I, regardless of what's happened in the past, passionately believe in moving forward together as Australians, as one. We have to break free, I think, of being, if you like, defined by the past.
Yeah. It's important to understand about who we are as a country from our history, and not for the purpose of weaponising that history against anybody, but just to have a better understanding of who we are.
The democratic, even egalitarian spirit in the colonies was very strong. And these places, so far from Britain, nonetheless had some of the highest wages in the world, not to mention pioneering the 8-hour workday. By the end of the 1850s, most colonies had their own constitution and effectively had full manhood suffrage, which generally included Aboriginal men. England would not achieve full manhood suffrage until 1918. America still kept slaves, largely owing to the tireless campaigning of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Women in South Australia were granted the vote as early as 1894, and all Australian women could vote federally by 1902. Women in England would wait another 26 years for the same rights. The colonies had democracy, industry, widely available private property, religious freedom and universal education from very early days. But there was still unfinished business. Throughout the 1890s, 4 conventions debated and discussed what a constitution for a single nation under the Southern Cross should be. Adopting the best of the Westminster system and the American Constitution, the Federation delegates produced one of the most stable constitutional systems of the modern world. And so these most precious and secure foundations of modern Australia were laid down by countless men and women. They were not perfect, and dark deeds happened on this sunny land. But while we acknowledge the darkness of the past, we have also chosen not to be defined by it. Our story is mostly of ordinary people pursuing ordinary ends, but together they built something extraordinary for all of us to cherish together.
Let's celebrate our history. Let's reject, as John Anderson says, the left's story of shame. Now, early in the new year, in February, over 4,000 people will meet again in London to keep driving the work of ARC forward as we on the Conservative side start the fight back against what we are told by the left is the inevitable decline of Western civilisation. As Neil Ferguson said, and as we all showed in the Voice referendum, now is the time we need the silent majority to take up the fight, because if they stay silent, if you stay silent, we will be a majority no longer.